Hey everyone, glad to be back as we continue here as Copa America slowly grinds through it. It's a summer where a lot of football will be played, but of course the hours in the day will seem to not be enough in terms of talking about subjects and subject matter in terms of Euros, in terms of Copa America. That's why I basically focused on what Copa America is going to be doing. Obviously, as I mentioned to everyone, what I'm looking to do in terms of Copa America, because obviously it's a coverage that is lacking significantly in the United States, especially in the United States. So I wanted to be able to offer a bit of a different perspective in terms of that. So Colombia and Venezuela, we start looking at that match, and many are considering it, and I think you do have merit to consider it one of these rivalry matches. Proximity, geography, culture, and recent results. I mean, it's not that, Venezuela is no longer that team that everyone runs over. It's a team that is competitive, is a team that maybe doesn't win a lot of the time, but man, for sure, it's a team that's going to give full effort each and every time they step onto a pitch. So they've been able to do it. Historically, they've had recent results where they've been better than Colombia. Actually, there was a period of time where Venezuela did not lose to Colombia. I think it was back from 2001 to 2016, 17. Again, I'm talking off the top of my head, but again, keep that in mind as far as, the era of not maybe dominance, I guess, if you want to look at it from that perspective, yeah. And Colombia did have trouble beating Venezuela, but now in recent outings against La Vinotinto, it's been quite the opposite. Colombia's been the better team. Now, that being said, with these types of matches and with a team like Venezuela that seems to be emboldened by the adversity that they're facing, you have a couple of players coming in. Not the key players, not the Salomon Rondons, not the Joseph Martinez. They're not back yet from COVID. There's a couple of players that are coming back. Talk has been that no Brujo Martinez for Venezuela, so we'll see how that plays out. Again, I don't have an official lineup for Venezuela, but you can start looking at Colombia from a probable perspective. You start looking at their lineup, and it's a little bit different. It's different compared to how they lined up against Ecuador. And it's Ospina en goal, Medina, Murillo, Davinson Sanchez, Don Jerry Mina, and Frank Fabra, who was just recently called up due to an emergency as Jairo Moreno gets injured. He comes in, and fortunately there was a spot because Fernando Otero ends up being taken out of the national team call-up because he had COVID, so he was able to be substituted that way. So Fabra makes his debut. In the middle, you have Wilmar Barrios and Baldomero Perlaza, who's an interesting player for Colombia. He'll be replacing, or at least it seems like he'll be replacing Mateus Uribe, the man that he plays at Porto, but also played at Club America. Many of you probably remember him from those days. Baldomero Perlaza is an interesting player, just big, corpulent, strong, intelligent player, technically gifted. He's very silky smooth in the midfield, but also has that propensity of losing the ball every so often, especially when he's going forward. But Baldomero Perlaza does offer Wilmar Barrios that bit of a buffer in front of him. So Barrios is the one that will probably stay back, and the balance will be there. Although if Barrios does go, Perlaza does have the capability of being able to cover the middle. So you have that double pivot, if you will, for Colombia. And it would be interesting to see those two playing together. It would be one of the first opportunities for Perlaza in that sector. Edwin Cardona and Cuadrado. And there's been talk about Cuadrado being out just to get some rest. He was superb in the match against Ecuador. He was superb. He's been superb even through this last round of World Cup qualifying play. So that form that he had from Juventus remains rather intact, but obviously the mileage is starting to set in. But in a match like today, where you could basically be not basically punching in your ticket, but you could at least now be fighting for one of the top 3 spots in the group instead of being that fourth place team. That when you start looking at the matchups from one end and the other, you end up advancing as the 4th place team. You end up playing the 1st place team in the opposite group. So it's now more of a jockeying of positions, if you will. So you look at it from that perspective, and it ends up changing a bit more. So Colombia now it's more about trying to scale positions, trying to be and keep pace with Brazil as far as points are concerned. Obviously, the big matchup of the round of this group will most likely end up being Colombia-Brazil later on. Of course, that's the next match that comes up for Los Cafeteros. Edwin Cardona, as I mentioned, he's the man that scored the goal, probably one of the best goals of the tournament so far, in that Mad Lab type of free kick execution that they had. So again, give them a lot of credit for that. And finally, there'll be a big change up top. Most likely it'll be Luis Muriel and Duvan Zapata, the Atalanta combo up top. So you have those two, of course, who have been in phenomenal form, not just this past season, but the season before that. So you have two players that are extremely familiar with one another playing in a position that is going to be quite interesting against the Venezuela side that had players in the match against Brazil just still trying to find out how one another play. So they've been able to get a couple of practices under their belt. So that'll be interesting to see these players kind of playing better. And I think they'll probably be a bit more adventurous going forward, especially if Colombia allows them to, or especially if Colombia gets wrong-footed defensively. So we'll see. In Venezuela has been an interesting subject. It was great to see a press conference actually yesterday where José Peseiro, the coach of Venezuela, obviously doesn't speak Spanish, speaks Portuguese, and he starts saying, hey, we've had a lot of vainas, he comes out with a couple of Venezuelan colloquialisms, trying to pretty much say, hey, we've been through a lot of stuff. We've been through a lot of shit as far as this Copa America is concerned. And obviously you laugh and jest, but it just shows the desperation and the situation that this Venezuelan side has had to go through. Well, in part because of their own doing to a certain extent, as I've mentioned before, and you can listen to the previous episodes where I do mention what happened with Venezuela and them breaking the bubble, violating the bubble with family members, YouTubers, influencers coming into their hotel while they're taking pictures. I mean, it was a very rock star type of environment in Caracas prior to the match against Uruguay. So it'll be one of those situations. So with that, we look at it from that perspective. I already talked about Brazil and Peru, and of course, check the previous episode out in order to find out a little bit more about that particular match. Later on tonight, I'll have the reactions to these two matches, and I'll give you a bit more perspective of what's going on Friday. Is one of the big match will be the La Plata derby between Argentina and Uruguay. At times, that match can be brilliant football, but most of the time, it ends up being a UFC preliminary card. There's no other way to put it. And it can be that. It can become that. So we'll see how it does end up evolving. So with that in mind, let me switch a little bit and let me start answering some of your questions. Question time, and I had a couple of questions. I'll take two in terms of what has been offered and what has been asked. The first one, of course, coming from at Danny Sutovsky, and of course, it was from the news that with the departure of, and this of course has something to do with South America, but also has to do with La Liga as well. With the departure of Sergio Ramos, I mentioned that Marcelo is next in line to become captain of Real Madrid, first captain of Real Madrid. That has not happened at Real Madrid. The fact that they haven't had a captain from the Western Hemisphere or a foreign captain, if you will, but especially from the Western Hemisphere. When Jose Giralt was made captain, and after him, it was Jose Giralt, of course, was a Cuban player that played for Real Madrid back in the early 20th century, the early 1900s. Then Federico Revuelto, he was a player that was from Guatemala, was playing at Real Madrid, and he was the captain for Real Madrid back in 1904. And he asked, well, what about Fernando Redondo? Yes, Fernando Redondo, during his time at Real Madrid, ended up being captain, but he was not the first captain. It was Fernando Hierro at that time. And of course, Fernando Hierro took over the captaincy of Real Madrid when Manolo Sanchis decided, when he ended up hanging it up and saying goodbye. It was then Fernando Hierro who ended up being the captain of Real Madrid, of course, until he left and it was Iker Casillas who took over. And then after that, of course, it ended up being Sergio Ramos. And he now ends up leaving, and the next one in line was him. And then if, by any chance, Marcelo, who still has a contract until next year, June of next year, if he ends up leaving, then it would be Karim Benzema that would end up being in line for the captaincy. So, again, as I mentioned, if you have any questions, please make sure you send them over, and I would be very happy to answer them as much as I can, as best as I can, and as quickly as I can. And you start looking at it from that perspective. Of course, everything that's gone on with Real Madrid and everything that's gone on with, Sergio Ramos leaving, there's been a lot of controversy in terms of that. And I think it's going to be part of yet a more interesting summer. And we'll see what ends up playing out in terms of those particular types of situations. Now, the next question is sent to me by Ramones62 over in Bangladesh. Hey, why VAR? Why is VAR never shown on TV in CONMEBOL? You know what, Ramon? That's a great question, and there hasn't been an official statement as to why. But in terms of, I'm very glad you mentioned, because it's not something that is new. It's been something that's been going on actually in the last Copa America as well. It wasn't shown. There were times that microphones would pick up what the referees were saying. I think that was a great idea to actually know and understand how referees think out, or the logic pattern that referees are using in order to be able to come to a conclusion. Maybe you agree with it, maybe you don't, but at the end of the day, it's not something that's left to supposition, that's left to, hey, you know what, and it starts leading to a lot of other types of speculations, like, oh, he got paid some type of suitcase or some type of brown bag or something along those lines, where you would think that the referee is cheating. I don't believe, honestly, that referees would go to such an extent. There might be some that have in the past, but it's more of a CONMEBOL thing that they have done, and it's been shown pretty much, and it's been translated into their world feed and into those types of things. I can't give you a straight answer because I don't have one, and there hasn't been something official, but the line that CONMEBOL is basically taken is not showing the replays. They'll show it later on when the decision's already been made, and then you say, okay, fine. And then a few hours afterwards, I'm not sure exactly if it's 12 or 24 hours afterwards, they usually put on their social media, usually on YouTube, the decision and the reason why, they disallowed a goal, the reason why this was a penalty, the reason why, whatever, a player was sent off or not sent off. So, or good decision, bad decision. They'll do that type of thing, and they'll create their content based on that as well. So I hope that is the best possible answer one can give. But again, it's a great question to something that has never really been clarified overall, but it'll be interesting to look. And if, of course, I hear from someone in the refereeing in CONMEBOL, I will be more than happy to do a follow-up to this and explain why. Again, guys, it's been a pleasure, and make sure that you follow all of the podcasts. Follow them here, follow them on YouTube, follow them, of course, on Spotify as well, and look forward to be able to offer you more content. And again, quick little thing. I don't usually do this because I prefer you doing it because you want to. But again, this is something I rarely ever do, and this will probably end up being one of the only times I end up asking this of you. Again, like I said, I don't ask because nothing worse for me than to ask and be able to offer you content, because I do it because I love doing it and I enjoy doing it. I don't expect anything in retribution. But if you could, especially on YouTube, be able to follow me there, be able to follow me here. Pretty much all of the places where this is coming out on, and whatever you prefer as far as your favorite platform to consume this content, make sure you follow it and give it the support it needs in order to continue. I'd like to be able to do even more than I'm doing right now, but I need your help, and I'd like to be able to do more in terms of this particular little adventure that I'm embarking on, and hopefully it is to your benefit. Of course, ultimately, it is hopefully to your benefit. So make sure that you follow me. Make sure you put like, all the other stuff that you usually do or people ask you to do on these types of platforms. So again, thank you so much, and I'll talk to you in a couple hours. Ciao.